for bearing with me. I know you're ready to get out of here, but I'll go and get right into it. So Jesus was the greatest disciple maker of all time. We all know that. But what if he had been an ineffective communicator? What if he had been cold and distant, like a smart college professor that no one on campus enjoys? Or what if he had never processed through his teachings with his disciples, like a wise sage who says lofty things that make absolutely no sense? I mean, come on, Jesus talked about fig trees and seeds and eating his flesh and drinking his blood. I mean, what did this guy mean? What would it have been like if he never explained his teachings? Or what if he had never told his disciples what to do in light of his teachings? You know, it'd be like Ben delivering a great sermon on a Sunday morning and then forgetting to tell us how we're supposed to apply it to our lives. Like, what if Jesus had been any of these? A heartless professor, a confusing sage, or an applicationless preacher? But we know that Jesus was none of these. He made known to his disciples that he cared for them. He made known to his disciples what his teachings meant. And he made known to his disciples what to do in light of those teachings. So what would Jesus do when it comes to effective discipleship? Well, Jesus demonstrated that effective discipleship requires effective communication. In order to be an effective communicator, we have to engage multiple aspects. And that requires us to be sincere, clear, and get our audience to adhere. So we could spend hours reading the Gospels, but I know that if I did that right now, all of you would probably want to shoot me. But we know that Jesus demonstrated for us how to be effective disciple makers. But we'll just spend a few minutes looking at some contemporary research that proves what Jesus already knew 2,000 years ago. So first, communication must be sincere. This is something I wish I would have known a year ago. I was leading an organization in Columbia at that time called How to Life. It was a high school-led organization with the goal of sharing the gospel to fellow high schoolers. And we were setting up this big one-night event. And in doing that, I was the president, and I was having to make all of these decisions. And I was clearly communicating what needed to be done, but I forgot to communicate that I cared for the ones who were doing it. And the result was that eventually the people who were under me in this organization just stopped listening because they didn't actually think that I cared about them. And so I share that story. Thankfully, God worked all things out for good, and it was a beautiful night. But I share that story because it shows that until those that we're discipling know that we care, it's all for naught. They have to know that we care about them. Ryan Edson, an author, a communications professor, and a pastor, argues that communication must engage the head, the hands, and the heart. And it creates this threefold communication triangle that is extremely strong when it comes to making disciples. So we saw what happens when I forgot to engage the heart. And we'll go ahead and look at now what it means to engage the head. And that leads us to point number 2, and that's that disciple-making communication must be clear. So in order to create a clear message, we have to first know our audience. And Quentin Schultz, the author of An Essential Guide to Public Speaking, reminds us that Paul would often go and get to know his audiences before he preached to them. In Acts 17, we read about Paul traveling into the city of Athens and studying the statues of the gods that they had there, immersing himself in the culture before he tried to communicate to the people living within that culture. So, in the same way, we have to know our audience in order to create a clear message for them. Paul wasn't going to communicate to a Jew and a Greek in the same way. So for us, we're not going to disciple a 5-year-old boy